Hello, everyone. Brainerd Carey here, Director of Praxis Center, and I'm here to talk about how to get your art into a museum. That's today's talk. At first, I just want to thank all the members that are here in this group, in this tribe, for being the wonderful members that you are. A lot of people have been really supportive of each other. People are getting into shows and doing different things, and as always, it's great to see all your support for one another. That makes all the difference in the world, because this is a community as well as a teaching forum. So I just want to say thank you all for supporting each other and by commenting on each other's posts within this private group. That really means the world to everybody here, and of course especially the person who's on the post. And it's a great manner to adopt anyway on social media, to support one another. So welcome here, everyone. I'm going to get to your questions at the end. And today I'm going to talk about getting your art into museums. This won't be too long a talk, and I'm also going to give you a resource at the end here. At the end of this talk, I'll post a link that has a whole list of museums and institutions that accept submissions for work. Often shows, not necessarily acquisitions, but I'll talk about that now. So, to begin with, today's talk is how to get your art into a museum. Now, there's two different ways to look at what that even means. There's getting your work acquired by a museum, so bought and into their collection, or accepted as a donation and into their collection. And there's having a show in the museum. So I'll do the acquisition part of that first. So all museums have acquisition committees and different acquisition processes. Some museums, like the Philadelphia Contemporary, are what's called non-collecting museums. They don't acquire anything. They don't collect anything. They all have very different policies, but that's because that's also a new museum, and they're building a new space. And when museums acquire work, when they purchase work, or even accept donations, it's kind of a big deal, because they need the space for it, especially if the work has any kind of size, if it's a canvas, if it's a sculpture, if it's work that's not on paper. It's a lot of storage. So a very serious decision for a museum to make. I'm going to begin by telling you how I got a piece of work acquired by a museum when I was first looking to do this. So I was making prints, mono prints. They were about 22 by 30 inches. It was printmaking. I was using a big press that I rented in New York, and there were these large black and white prints. I was living in Rhode Island at the time, and I went to the Rhode Island School of Design Museum. RISD is a school, a university. That's the acronym, RISD. And the Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD, also has a museum, a really nice one. A lot of colleges do have museums with major collections that are fantastic to see. And so this was my first shot at doing this, but I went there and went to the front desk and I said, can I speak to the curator of prints? I'm interested in talking about acquisitions, about purchasing a work of mine. It was fairly bold, but that was what I did. I walked to the museum and asked the person at the front desk, can I speak to the curator of prints, of work on paper, because I'm interested in having my work acquired or bought. So she called her up on the phone, with the switchboard there, and said, okay, here she is, which was kind of lucky that I got through to her right away, but it was a university museum. Things are a little bit easier there. And she said, sure, if you have prints to show me, you could come back on this day or this day. So I was pretty thrilled. I came back with my big portfolio box. I had prints in them. I went down to see the curator. We opened up the box. On her gigantic table, we were in a room where all the work on paper was. Again, work on paper is a little easier to acquire, because if it's not framed, which they'd prefer it not be, it goes right into a flat file, right, which is really easy to store. So she looked through my prints and said, how much are these? I said, $800 each. She looked through them and she started pulling some aside. And she pulled like 6 aside in total. And then she said, let me just look at these for a minute. I'd really only like to look at 3 or 4. She takes a few out. So she's left with 3 prints. And she said, I like these. She said, let me get back to you. I have to meet with a committee first, and I'll tell you how that goes. Something like that. That's what I remember. I was so excited. I was thrilled out of my mind, really. I was thinking, oh my God, she's acquiring prints. This is so cool. So I left. A day later, I get a phone call that says, it was a message that was left on my phone that says, hi, Brainerd, thanks for letting us see your prints. We're not acquiring them at this time, but you can come by and pick them up. So I was pretty, I was taken down a few notches. I was upset. I was like, they're not acquiring the prints. But she told me she wanted the prints, or that's how I remembered it, that she wanted the prints. And so I was really struggling with it. I was upset. I felt almost as like I was betrayed, right? Like she was so nice, talking to me all about the prints and how much she liked the work, and then they don't want them. They don't like them now. What happened? So, maybe that I might feel differently now, but what happened then was and this is still what I believe in, is that, never leave a conversation off with kind of resentment and anger like I was feeling. Call them up and call the person and talk to them. Tell them how you feel, right? In relationships, but in professional businesses, it's the same thing, there are people that come into companies that are having problems, that are kind of mediators and analysts and efficiency experts. But often what they end up doing is getting people within a company to talk to each other and talk about resentments they have, which is why things are dysfunctional and not working well. So that's just another analogy for me to say I wanted to call the woman back and tell her my feelings because I was upset. So I called back the curator, and she didn't answer. I left her a message, and I said, hi, this is Brainerd. I got your message, and I just want to tell you I'm upset. I thought you liked the work. I'm really upset that you didn't want to get the prints. I brought them down there. I showed them to you, and I just, I know you can do what you want, but I just wanted to tell you I'm upset. And I said, but thank you for looking at the prints, right? Hung up the phone. I got a call back from her the next day that said, hi, Brainerd, I'd like you to come down. I'd like you to come down and bring those and see me again. Before you pick up those prints, I want you to see me. So I went down and saw her, and she said, you know what, we're acquiring these prints. So I just wanted to ask where to send the check to. Kind of amazing, right? So this is one story of acquisition, and it's an odd one, I know, and it's an emotional one. But that's actually what happened. And I wasn't, a known quantity at all then. It had nothing to do with that. It was a combination of them liking the prints, then whatever happened in the meantime that made them not acquire them, and my phone call, which wasn't accusatory, but telling them my feelings, that somehow turned it around and they acquired the prints for their permanent collection. I'm not saying you should all do that, but it's what happened with me, and it's one way of handling emotions, right? And in this case, sometimes when you tell people exactly how you feel, it may not get the result that you want, but it at least closes the situation in a way that's not dysfunctional. But sometimes you actually get what you want, which is clarity in the situation, and sometimes or in a relationship, and sometimes more. Okay, so that was one example, and the way to do that is not necessarily exactly how I did it, but basically, yes, you walk into a museum, whether it's the Whitney, the Guggenheim Museum of Modern Art, a local museum, or a university museum, which is very accessible, and say to them, if you have a painting, if you have a print, and keep in mind that works on paper are easier to acquire because they just put them in a flat file, very easy to store. Whereas paintings and large sculptures or small sculptures are much harder for them to acquire. Nevertheless, there's a process. So the way they get into museums is you go to the front desk, you ask anybody at the front desk, depending on whether you're a painter, or you have prints, and I'm not talking about digital prints or reproductions. They have to be some kind of fine art prints on rag paper that are being produced. Could be a digital reproduction, of course, but not a digital reproduction of a painting, something that's meant to be a print. It could even start off as digital art and come out as a fine art archival print. That's okay. But again, Go to the front desk of museums, ask, can I talk to the curator of prints, the curator of paintings, the curator? I'm interested in talking to them about acquisition. They'll all have a process. They'll all have a different process because it all depends on their individual storage space, basically. That's what it's all about. Storage space. It's critical for a museum. That's why they let go of things. They sell work. It's tricky. So that's how work gets acquired by a museum. Now, the other way of getting your art into a museum, since that was the title of this talk, acquisitions are important. And maybe I should also say, you may say, but what about donating the work? Can I donate the work? That's no different than them buying it. It really isn't. In some cases, yes, you can donate the work, but it's the same process for them. It's about storage, so it doesn't make it that much easier for them to acquire work, even if they don't have to purchase it. Because museums often purchase work for their permanent collection that costs tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars by well-known artists. So the donation aspect isn't critical. You don't have to say, I want to sell that, I'm willing to donate this to you. They'll ask that if they want a donation, but start off by asking, what you want for that print, the retail price. Okay, so the second part of this talk, how to get your work into a museum in terms of an exhibition. I'm going to post a link here to a resource that has a lot of list of museums. Hopefully some of them aren't out of date. If they are, let me know. But they're all museums that acquire work. And not acquire work, but that show work or have open calls. Some of them do acquire work. There usually isn't an open call or a posted kind of process for acquisitions. But there is a posted process for shows in museums, which are often open calls. So, okay, that's the way to get your work into a museum, of course, in terms of an exhibition, is apply to open calls that many of them have and many of them don't have. Again, I'm going to post a list here of a lot of them that do have that. That's one way of getting into a museum. So another way is to make a direct proposal to a museum. This is how I got into the Whitney Biennial. I wrote them a letter and was lucky enough to get in. I wasn't represented by a gallery. And also, a little while later, I had a solo show at the Whitney Museum of American Art. That was a proposal. I went right to them. And even in the end, they call that a commissioned proposal, as if they went out and asked me to do it, which was very cool. The way I did that was, so there's just going by guidelines and doing it that way. And then there's knowing that a museum may have a flexible space where you can show. So I would do a little research. When I knew the Whitney Museum somewhat, I knew that they had a main museum, but they also had a place on 42nd Street, which was called the Altria Space. And a lot of museums have things like this. They have kind of satellite spaces where there are large indoor public malls or something, and a museum has a way of getting extra work out into the public by leasing or cooperating with the people in that space. The Altria space was one of those spaces. It was curated by a well-known curator, Shamim Momin, and who I had no connections with, didn't know, but she's a well-known curator, and the space was 5,000 square feet. It was huge. So what I did was I called the museum and I made a meeting with someone who was a very low-level curator there. I was thinking I wanted to ask Shamim Momin about that space, but she was a very high-level curator, and it's often difficult to access them and get a meeting with them. This was my method anyway. So what I did was I called the museum and got the email of someone who was their live events curator. A curator who's not so high-level, who's not so busy. And even my wife at the time, we were a collaborative, but my wife was saying, why are we meeting with her? She does events there. That's all she does is events. I said, I know, but let's see if we can just get in the door with her. So it was easy to get in the door with her. I asked for a 15-minute meeting in their cafeteria. That's what I tend to do. Ask people, especially in museums, for 15-minute meetings in their cafeteria at lunchtime or on a break. Harder for them to say no. And they are public servants, after all. They're working for a nonprofit institution. So there's a good likelihood they could say yes. Not Shamim Momin, she wouldn't have said yes, I'm pretty sure, or the director or chief curator or head curator of paintings or performances. That would be hard still. They're super busy people. But someone who's doing events or assistant curator to someone, more likely. And it's okay to talk to those people because, as I'll explain in this story, they get you in the door. So we go to that meeting. And this is what I brought to that meeting. I had a piece of paper with me because I've had meetings before with curators that failed miserably, and I won't go into those, but the way they failed was I talked to them about what I'm doing and what we're doing, my wife and I, and they say, well, thanks, let's keep in touch. And it feels like the kiss of death, and it kind of is. It's like, well, where do we go from here? So in this one, I came in with 3 proposals. It was small, medium, and large proposal. The large one was the one that I wanted to do with Shamim in the Altria space. So I said to this woman, Lamore Tomer, who's the woman that I talked to, I said, hi, how are you? How's it going here? The Whitney, I know you're busy with the events. They seem great, chit-chatting a little bit. And she said, yeah, things are good. We're doing this and that. And she said, so what are you guys up to? What's going on? And I said, okay, I wanted to ask you about 3 projects we're working on. And potential venues for them. So I said, number 1, here's a project of prints. These are all prints that are designed to be seen together in a group of 15. They're framed, they're abstract, and they have kind of a noir aesthetic. They're black and white. Do you know of a venue where these would be appropriate? That was my question to her. Not can I show them in this museum? Do you know of a venue where they would be appropriate to show? Immediately, she's not cornered. She's thinking in her mind, oh yeah, other nonprofits. So she says to me, well, you should, maybe talk to these guys or these guys. They have a space that might be interested. Okay, I wrote it down. Then I said, then there's this other medium show that has videos in it and a few other elements and a couple performances. Do you know a venue where that might be good to show? And she said, well, maybe this one or this one. And again, is pointing me in other directions, which is cool. That's how you leave a meeting with something when she could very well say the same thing about the last proposal that I gave her, but she didn't. But you'd still leave that meeting with something valuable from the curator because they're pointing you to other venues. So then I said, and then there's the 3rd project. The 3rd project is this large kind of immersive film set where we want to make. It's like as if you were walking into a movie. I said, so imagine there's a film screen. You're watching a movie, and you get to walk right through the screen, right into the movie. And suddenly it's like a set. You're an actor in a set, and you're part of it, and you're in this installation, and there's sculptures and art and prints, different things happening, but you're also part of a movie. And that is a movie in itself. Something like that, right? I said, so, we imagine this a little bit like an adult playground for, more or less, something that's really fun. I said, like, sometimes you see a set on the street, people making a film, and we kind of cautiously walk around it, right? Because we're not supposed to get near that set while they're shooting on the street. I said, but this is like a scenario where you're walking right into the set, and it requires a big space, like 4,000 or 5,000 square feet. And she said, oh, wow, that sounds interesting. That might be good in the Altria space. She said, but I don't know. I don't curate that space, of course. And, she said, but that's good to know. She said, so I'll mention that to Shamim, unless you want to send me something on that. I said, yeah, let us send you something on that first. So, bingo, I was really lucky there. And like I said, I had a lot of failed talks with curators in different ways. But even if she hadn't said yes to that moment, or tentatively that she would pass it on to just the person I wanted her to pass it on to, there was some success there. In the first 2 proposals, which again, I wasn't showing her images, no iPad, nothing, just talking. When I was, those first 2 references she gave me to other nonprofits were really important. Those were good ones. So that was really helpful. Even if I hadn't got the 3rd yes, maybe that would have been a valuable meeting. I could have said goodbye, taken her card, and we're done. Or not even taken her card. I already have her email. So then I followed up. And the way I followed up with her is I sent, and this is kind of one way of responding, I said, okay, here's a description of the show, which I'm calling Dreams and Possibilities. And And I said, here's a 2-line description. And the 2-line description was just like 2 sentences that said, like walking into an adult playground, this immersive film experience allows the viewer to walk through a film and into what looks like a fun house of a film set. Second one was extended description, so that's almost like 1 sentence describe the show, because in a listing in a newspaper or somewhere, that's how they're gonna list it, no matter what your show is, with like 1 sentence. So second description was a little bit longer. It was like a paragraph or so, and then I wrote full description, and it was a little more about what would go into it, maybe 4 paragraphs. I sent that to Lamore. She sent that off to Shamim. Shamim said, I'm interested in a meeting. Okay, so I'm thrilled out of my mind now. I go to that meeting with my wife. We have really nothing to show for it. We have a piece of paper and that had kind of an image on it of a film and what it means to walk through a film, because to me that was the most sort of magical sounding part of it. You walk through a film. I wanted to focus on that because I didn't know what would be in the exhibit, really. I wasn't sure. It was an idea we had. So they were interested. They said, we're interested, we need more information from you. And essentially there were multiple meetings. They said, you want to do it this fall or next fall? I took almost a year. I said, I want the next date, a year. So there's plenty of time to do this. That show eventually happened. That was really exciting, big solo show that they called a Whitney Commission, which was exciting. So that's 2 ways of getting into a museum: acquisition, through a proposal is the story I told you, and otherwise for exhibiting in the museum. I'm putting a link here just for you guys, of course, the private group members here, for museums that are also accepting proposals. So I imagine you may have some questions. I'll take them now, but essentially that's to summarize that last half of proposing something to a museum. First, you have to know if you're proposing to a specific museum near you, which is what I suggest. Does that museum have any flexible space? Like the Whitney had that satellite show. To ask for a show directly in the Whitney, that's not going to happen, or is incredibly unlikely, because all the curators in the Whitney have things planned out in the future. They're pulling from their permanent collection. All that real estate in a museum is precious. So unless it's a university museum, which may have a little more flexibility, it's ideal if the museum has some space there that's flexible. Sometimes that could be a performance space where things can happen in there, and you could have a 2-day show in there, which is still super cool. A 2-day show in a museum, you have an opening, it's great, it's on your resume. So look for flexible spaces, not moving in where their permanent collection is. And then talk with a curator there, ask for a meeting in their cafe of someone who's an assistant curator, someone who's very low-level curator, because if you get them interested, they can easily pass it up and you're in the door. Okay, so let me ask questions, answer your questions. Luna, Bill, welcome everyone. Diana, Kip, Martin, Karen. Yeah, you guys are interested in this talk today, huh? Sandy, great to have you guys here. Okay, so yes, and this video will be available in the classroom afterwards. Great, a lot of people are saying it. So I'm going to put this link right here also for you guys right now. That link is a link to a doc that is a directory of museums that are accepting submissions. So again, if there's something in there that there's no longer working, let me know. A lot of these museums have rotating kind of schedules, so they're closed for 2019 or 2020 or whatever it is. But that's a directory that has a lot of information in it. Hey, Saren, great to have you aboard. Saren, you guys should know Saren, who's there, has a really amazing supply store in New York City, and you should all go there. Guerra Paints, really great supply store. So Saren, yeah, hope you heard that. That was all about not just getting a solo show at the Whitney Museum and getting an acquisition by RISD, but a number of other tactics to get your work into museums. Did I speak about how not having a visual portfolio with you during the meeting? Had those curators already seen it in the Whitney? Um, no, they hadn't already seen it. Nobody had seen it. I was talking to them a little bit about work, but in this case, the project was also about if you're bringing in paintings or something, like Saren's bringing in images or something of your paintings, have what I would suggest is rather than an iPad, have 8x10 glossies printed out, and you can show them that way. Much easier way to see work, especially if you're sitting at a table, as I was ultimately at the Whitney with, 3 people or 4 people, a curator, 2 assistants, exhibition manager. It's good if everybody has images. I tend to think don't bring a computer, don't bring an iPad. I don't think screens are the best thing to look at. And they're not the best thing conversationally. It's nice to just look at them and be having a conversation so they feel that they relate to you and what you're talking about. Yeah, Luna says she has made the experience that smaller museums offer space for free. Yeah, that very often can happen. Um, so yeah. Saren also says, thanks for the plug, Saren. Why don't you also put the link in here to your to the store, into the comments here, because everyone, it's not that I'm just plugging away here, but those paints are really special. If you're a painter, it's really a fantastic store, and the kind of work that Saren does, which you guys should also see, is very sculptural on the canvas because she's using unusual mediums. This, of course, is aside from our talk, but there's a lot of members here doing all kinds of interesting things. And so, Saren, I hope you'll put that link in there to your store, and I hope you guys will check that out because it's really very special paint, our artisan paint. My experience as well, 8x10 glossy is productive. Great, yeah, because it's visual. Everybody there is visual, right? And iPads, screens. I know we all look at them all the time, but they're just not as attractive to see work on in most cases. Okay. Also, some museums occasionally put out calls for artists for upcoming group shows. If you get on their email list, yeah, she's saying, Kathleen saying you can hear when calls are going out. That's how I got my first museum show, which turned into an invitation to be their artist in residence, right, with a solo show when they got to know more about my work, when the curators asked to visit my studio and saw the whole range of my work. So great post by Kathleen. Thanks, Kathleen. The link that I put in here, you guys, is a lot of museums who accept open calls. Thanks for sharing that, Kathleen. Okay, put the link in there again. Yeah, here it is. I just put it in there again, Melissa. Luna, not come across full of expectations is important, I think. Not to come across full of expectations. Also allow enough time for the application process. Yeah, I could give a whole talk, and I think I will, on expectations and silence, and what happens when you get turned down, how to manage those feelings. My general feeling is never accept silence for an answer. Never. I could tell you a lot of stories about that, and where I pursued somebody, and like anyone, you start feeling like, God, maybe they're going to hate me. Better that you get an answer, than not, and you start projecting all your fears onto a situation. That's my feeling. Great. So Saren posted the link there. Thanks, Saren. Eva, will there participants with any production cost? Okay, museums, that's a good question. Museums and production costs, right? This is how I dealt with the Whitney. I wanted to make a film there. They said I could be there. Here's how I deal with production costs at museums. Because this was the Altria, Shamim we were multiple meetings in. Okay, what is this going to cost you to produce? Now, I don't know what the Whitney has in terms of a production budget, but they're usually slim, right? In the biennial, for example, they give you $400, maybe a little more now, but like nothing. They know you're in the Whitney Museum, and so, there you go. So for this time, because I had done this at other museums when I did kind of small events or performances, I'd ask for the moon. So if you ask for too much money, they'll tell you immediately, oh no, we can't afford that. We only have this much in our budget. So bingo, I'll take that. So that's what I did for the Whitney. I made something that was a little more elaborate. On a piece of paper, I drew all these circles. I called it the octo budget because there was 8 circles. And it was just in pencil, but it was visual, right? I drew it all out. And on the top, it said the octo budget for Dreams and Possibilities event. Installation. And then at the top, it said 950K was the budget, right? 950,000. So I said, well, the whole budget is 950,000. And they were like, whoa, that's I said, I know. I said, don't worry, I'll raise most of that. Here are the more essential elements of it. I said, just the idea of I said, we want to make a film, so that would cost a lot of money. And there are other elements that would cost money. But I said, actually, the smallest element is, installation and deinstallation and some payment of people that are involved. That would be 22,000. I said, so that 22,000, I can also raise some money for. And they said, whoa, Shamim said the most we can give you is $5,000, the most. And so I said, okay. And then another woman at the table, who was Lamore, the initial person, she said, well, I could also get $5,000 for you if you kind of build me in installments for different aspects of it under $500. I said, okay. So that was a total of $10,000, which was a lot, and for them to give. But again, I would shoot for the moon in order to get an amount that's so you find out what their budget is. Shamim could give no more than $5,000, and that other woman had also cap on $5,000 if it was billed in short amounts. I did also write to the trustees and ask for money, and was able to get money from some people by direct asks as well. But that's how I dealt with their budget, because you never know what their production budget is, and sometimes they have like none. So you need to ask for a lot, and then say, I'll raise the rest if you guys can't. And see what the most is that they have. Okay. So yeah, I think I asked. The other link is up. I think I answered Luna's question. So create a fundraising campaign for the show, or are there grants specifically for that? There aren't. Well, there may be some grants specifically for that, but sometimes, yeah, there's fundraising for the show. The Whitney Biennial, there was one guy there, Erwin Rettel, the year I was in. The Whitney asked him to do a huge curtain of LED lights, which is his thing on the front of the Whitney. They said, we can't pay for you to do it, so you'd have to raise the money. That was a huge project for him. That would cost him over $10,000 to build. The Whitney was giving him a space to do it and no money to do it at all. I found out about this because I knew him, and I also went to Creative Time and other organizations that didn't give me money. But they said, look, the Whitney knows that it's a special thing. And so Erwin then started to raise money. He went and asked individual donors who had bought pieces in the past. Eventually, he put together that money. So there wasn't a grant for him, even though he was in the Whitney Museum. He created you could say, a fundraising campaign. Any fundraising campaign of $14,000 like that for an installation at the Whitney wouldn't necessarily be successful on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or GoFundMe. It was essential that he also did individual asks with people. So I hope that helps, Eva. One of my problems has often been to get my art into any place that accept my art specifically. The cost of shipping. As far as I remember, you had addressed the situation at some point. Got to check in where that was. So talking with the museum gallery and to possibly split the cost for transport might be a possibility, right? Yeah, possibility of transport, absolutely. That's something you would negotiate with them, absolutely. But there's also ways around transport. Some artists, because that is an issue, if you can make work in a studio near the museum 3 months before the show, that would be cool, obviously, and save you a ton of money, and both of them money. Otherwise, shipping costs, can be split by you in the museum. Another way to get around shipping costs, well, not to get around them, but, canvases, roll them up, fold them if that's possible. Work in smaller squares that can be assembled large. it's tricky to ship work and can be expensive. If they're large canvases, it's tens of thousands of dollars to ship and crate them professionally, just a fortune. So most cases, unless the museum has that much money to ship that much work, it's ideal to use the budget, obviously, for your fees. And so it goes into your pocket as opposed to shipping. And that's either finding an economical way to shipping, again, like rolling or folding if it's canvas, or packing or creating work in a modular form, or building the work near the museum in 3 or 4 months before in a type of self-created residency. That would probably be cheaper as well. But yeah, you would negotiate them about that, of course. Okay. Kathleen says, Instagram got me into different museum shows when a curator liked one of my photographs and selected it for the museum's online gallery theme exhibition. I hashtag a lot of museums and curators and developed relationships through Instagram messages. Instagram works with continuing traction and presence. Great to hear that, Kathleen. Yeah, I couldn't support Kathleen's comment more. Everybody read that. She's saying exactly what's going on in there. Follow museums, tag them, because you think, oh, they're big museums, are they really looking at their Instagram accounts? You bet they are, because even when MoMA or the Whitney or some big museum posts something, it's not like when Lady Gaga posts something, there's like 100 or 1,000 comments. There's like 5 comments, 10 comments. The art world is a small, rarefied place. So when people are commenting on posts, connecting with a museum, they're not as busy as you think, especially when it comes down to their social media and what's getting traction, what's bringing in people. So thank you for that, Kathleen. Yeah, and hashtagging, as Luna is also pointing out, it's a non-demanding way of contacting people, of connecting. So again, everybody, great to see you here. I have lots of talks coming up that I'm going to post soon. I want to wish you all a wonderful day in the studio. You can always ask questions here still. I'm going to post that link again down here for museums accepting proposals. And I want to thank you all for being the wonderful, loving tribe that you are, for commenting on each other's posts and saying the helpful things that you are. And to give one more plug to Saren, please check out Guerra Paints, because besides the fact that she's a member, I don't know if you guys have ever used like beautiful handmade paints, but you should check it out. So you can ask her a question about that. That's further in this feed, Saren. And thank you guys. Thank you again for again being the supportive tribe that you are. Lots of love to all of you. I wish you well in your studios and look forward to any of your questions. And thank you for your questions and comments in this post. I'll post the one more time here. I'll post this down here. And just to make one more comment here is that posting in a link again, if the museums are far away from you, then work with the list that I posted if you can't see them. But really, you have to have a face-to-face meeting at some point. That's really important. That has to happen usually at some point, a face-to-face meeting. But if you can't, then yeah, by all means, letters, introducing yourself. You can do it that way. And also applying to the open calls that I posted there is a better way. If you have no museums near you or you can't reach out, but personal relationships one-on-one is really huge. It's everything. So okay, everybody, have a wonderful weekend as well. Thank you for all the reasons I said. You guys were wonderful for supporting each other and posting and all these great things. And great to have you all in the group. And you'll see lots more talks coming up. If you have suggestions for other talks, please don't hesitate to make a separate post saying, Brainerd, could you tag me and say, Brainerd, could you do a talk on X, Y, or Z? And if I can, I'll do that talk or get an expert here to do it. Okay, thanks everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful day, weekend, wherever you are.